Okay, good evening, everyone. It's Tuesday night, and I want to welcome you all to another edition of USA Hockey Officiating's ZoomCasts. My name is Scott Zelkin, and I'll be your host as we discuss communicating with teams and players. I'm joined tonight by a group of three gentlemen that have vast experience across the realm of hockey. And can kind of bring us thoughts from every side of the ice on this topic. Our first panelist is Keith Kaval. Keith has been a very successful official across a number of levels. He had a long career in the American Hockey League as a referee. He also refereed in the ECHL as well as junior leagues like the USHL. And we were very proud from a USA Hockey standpoint to have him now into work 6 top-level international IIHF events, including 3 World Championships, 2 World Juniors, and an Under-18. In those 4 events, Keith was selected at the top end of those in the officiating ranks and worked 4 medal games, including 2 gold medal games. Keith is currently the Director of Officiating for the North American Hockey League and the NAHL at the Tier 3 Junior League. Like Keith, our second panelist is also a former referee, and that's Paul DePuydt. Paul spent about 10 years officiating across the junior and minor professional levels, and in addition spent some time working internationally as a referee. But for the purposes of tonight's Zoomcast, Paul's a head coach. A number of years ago, Paul put his stripes aside and went to the other side of the bench and has coached collegiately. And is now and for a number of years has worked with the Rocky Mountain RoughRiders organization, which is a Tier 1 youth program, and he's currently the head coach of the Bantam AAA Tier 1 Rocky Mountain RoughRiders out in Colorado. So we want to welcome Paul. And then finally, our third guest is Greg Moore. Greg is the current head coach of the Toronto Marlies in the Hockey League, the top affiliate of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Prior to that, he was a head coach in the USHL with the Chicago Steel and an assistant coach with the NTDP in Plymouth. Greg had a long and I would say distinguished playing career. He played at the NTDP a number of years ago, then went on to have a 4-year career at the University of Maine in Hockey East, where he was their captain. He then went on and played in the National Hockey League with both the New York Rangers and the Columbus Blue Jackets, and spent time in the American Hockey League as well as playing overseas in Europe. Interestingly enough, also, Greg was a 2-time member of the World Junior team for the United States, including a member of the 2004 team, which was the first team ever in the history of USA Hockey to bring home a gold medal at that event. So we want to welcome all 3 of our panelists. I think they're going to be able to provide a wide breadth of experience and knowledge to help us all as we learn a little bit about why communicating and communication skills as an official is really important. And with that, I think, Keith, just real quick, when I say communication and why is it important for an official, in a couple of sentences, what comes to mind for you is somebody now as a manager of officials and a former official yourself?
I think communication is probably one of the most critical parts of being an official. And for all officials that are out here watching this and learning and trying to get better, communication isn't easy. Communication is a learned skill. It doesn't happen overnight. A lot of it's trial and error, with mostly a lot of error and learning from mistakes and how to deal with players and coaches. But it's such a vital component to being a good official and learning and more importantly, listening to what the players and coaches have to say, as long as it's in a respectful manner. For all of us, regardless whether you're a mite or squirt official or you're at the junior level or above, you're constantly learning, and communication really is one of the most important components to being a successful official. And if you can't communicate, it doesn't matter how well you skate, it doesn't matter the position you're in, you're not going to be a successful official.
Oh, that's great. Paul, what do you think when we talk about this topic right off the bat?
Right off the bat, we're talking about communication where players and coaches and officials work, harmoniously to a certain extent, breaking down barriers between them of kind of the mindset of what happens in a game when you have essentially three teams. You have the officials, you have the one home team and the away team, and ultimately you're trying to put a good product in front of everyone and do what's right for the game of hockey. So the communication level between all parties is very important.
That's great. And Greg, at the upper levels, which is where you're kind of residing now, and even from junior hockey, what do you think initially when we talk about communication from an officiating standpoint?
Well, I like what Paul said right there, the word harmonious. I think a lot of times coaches don't take the perspective of thinking that the refs and the coaches are working together to create a really quality product for the players and for the athletes to enjoy the sport that they're trying to play. And, there's got to be a respect level between the two. And I think the two can also help each other better themselves within what they're trying to accomplish within the game as well.
No, for sure. That's great. And like you've all said, I mean, it's all about building rapport. It's building bridges to get to the end goal, which is a successful product. At the lower levels, it's serving the game. It's an enjoyable experience for the players. And at the upper levels, it's, providing a good quality hockey experience or product. Just like we do every week, I want to acknowledge we have two groups watching, tuning in tonight. We have one group that's part of the ZoomCast webinar. Those people are going to be able to interact, and I would certainly encourage that through the Q&A and the chat functions on your screens. A little bit later in this broadcast, we are going to be able to take some questions for the panelists and answer some questions. We also have another group that's watching and tuning in on YouTube Live. Unfortunately, you guys can't interact and ask those questions, but at the same time, I'm sure there's going to be no different than we had last week when we talked about abuse and zero tolerance. There's going to be some good stuff that's coming out where we're going to be able to ask these guys some things and hopefully learn some stuff. And just like we did last week, I want to start with a few poll questions. Just to throw it out there, we've got four questions for everybody in the audience. I'm going to launch it here, and we'll take a couple of minutes while you take a look at these questions, and then we'll see what they come back with. So I've got four questions. How important do you feel an official's ability to communicate with players and coaches is? Number one, we might have already answered that, but we'll keep going. And then number two, have you ever felt like a player or coach has held a grudge against you as an official because of previous game experiences? Number three, we flip that, and as an official, have you ever held a grudge against a player or a coach because of previous game experiences? And those, all of these are anonymous, so you're not turning yourself in. And then as an official, have you ever reflected on a game that you worked and felt like your communication made the game harder or more difficult for you to officiate? So we're getting some good answers here. We're gonna give it a few more seconds before we close it out, and then I'll share those results with you all. All right, we'll give it about 5 more seconds. Most everyone has been able to vote here. All right, so the results are are interesting. They're not too interesting on the first one because everybody's unanimous. Well, they're still interesting. So 96% of you felt communication is extremely important. We do have one, I'm not an official out there. So that's good too. Welcome. The next one, an overwhelming majority of you have felt like a player or coach held a grudge against you as an official because of previous game experiences. Have you ever held a grudge against a player or coach because of previous games experiences? And 73% of you said no. I'll be honest with you, I would fall in that yes category. So, and we're going to talk a little bit later about how to kind of get over that. And then this one I really like. 85% of you have said you've been able to reflect back and and realize that your communication maybe made things a little more challenging. So we're gonna come back to that stuff in a little bit. Right now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna spend just a couple of minutes here, and we're gonna work our way through a presentation. We're gonna ask our panelists to comment as we get into it, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. So if I can drive the bus well here. Communication with teams. If you can't communicate effectively, you can't officiate effectively. And that's really regardless of level. And I think Keith, well, all three, Keith, Greg, and Paul all talked about it a little earlier. Communication is the way you build bridges. We're all going to make mistakes. But honestly, if you're a good communicator and you've developed a good rapport with a coach or with players, it's also going to allow you the ability to get away with a few more of those mistakes. If you're a poor communicator, it's going to be tougher to get away with those mistakes. Why do officials communicate, right? There's really two reasons as an official we're communicating. We're communicating to give information, and then we're communicating to answer questions. So if we're giving information, coach, your team's going to be shorthanded for 2 minutes because you're getting the extra minor penalty, and this is why. Or, you know what, Paul, we're going to let the ice set up a little longer. The Zamboni driver put too much water out here. Could you keep your players at the bench for the next couple of minutes? The other reason we're going to communicate with players and coaches is to answer questions. A coach may have a question about something, or they may need an explanation. We're going to answer questions through captains and alternate captains when they may be delivering messages from teams or, from the coaching staff, or if they have questions. The information might be, hey, we need your help with something. So those are really why officials communicate. There's two types of communication, right? There's verbal and nonverbal. Verbal communication, we all know what that is. That's what I'm doing right now. It's the voice. It's, relaying information verbally. However, there's different ways you can do that, right? Keith, you can be quiet and calm and do it quietly, or you can stand 10 feet away and scream at the top of your lungs. And certainly how you verbally communicate is really important too, correct?
Absolutely. And I think from the nonverbal component, you just walking into the arena, how you look, how you carry yourself, how you greet people, that's an important part of even before the game even starts, with your other fellow officials warming up before the game, little things like that. You might not think about it, but that's another form of communication. Are you professional? Are you engaged and getting ready for the game? I think that's very important. That's something we don't think about a lot of the times, that the players see us, the coaches see us, the parents see us, and not that we particularly care what the parents may think about us, but certainly if you're walking into the rink and you're dressed well and you look professional, that gives a better feeling to all the participants that this official's here and they're ready to go to work, versus maybe you're running late, maybe unfortunately you're running from work, you look disheveled, and maybe you don't look ready. Maybe people think differently of you before you even step on the ice, and that's something that we as officials can control.
No, for sure. And when you talk about communication, and if you research this, and we've talked with different people within the junior program about communication, you're going to get different statistics, but almost every one of those statistics is going to say how you communicate non-verbally is almost more important, if not more important, than how you communicate verbally. And I see Greg shaking his head in agreement, or nodding his head in agreement there. I'm sure, Greg, you could give us some examples of that, and how both good and bad nonverbal communication can help an official or an official with players and coaches.
Yeah, as we were opening this up and we were talking about the communication piece, the body language portion of it was the first thing I thought of. And then as Keith was just talking now, first impressions are huge. I think it's really important that as referees, you come out onto the ice, how friendly are you acting? How responsive are you to making eye contact with the coaches, and already without even saying anything, having a willingness to build that relationship so that during the game there's going to be a sense of communication. I've had times where refs won't even look at you. They hide on the other side of the rink. They come out not showing the best body language or not a confident body language. You can tell when a ref is skating up and down the ice and they're not confident in what they're doing. And I think at times coaches might take advantage of that if they can see that weakness within them.
Well, for sure. Paul, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, I think you guys touched on most of it, but for me, a couple little things that get to you as a youth, you know, coach in this perspective right now is a referee who shows up to the rink 5 minutes before the game, and then his counterparts are having to get on the ice and he's not out there yet. And you just know, like, does this guy think that he's bigger than the game in essence because he shows up late and his buddies have to go on the ice, but he's not out there yet. And those little things like that carry a long way. And it's like you said, the appearance of the way you dress, and then the body language when you step on the ice, you know, and are you approachable? Are you friendly? Do you carry yourself in a professional manner, or are you out there joking around? I think one thing that can grind me a bit is if, let's say, it's a perspective thing. It's where one coach is being talked to by the official before the game, and then all of a sudden that referee doesn't go over and talk to the other coach. He just kind of does things talking on one side and doesn't talk to the other. I said it's a perception thing of what the fans might see, the parents, and then also what does the other coach think if he doesn't even get spoken to, and if that referee's yucking it up with the other coach. No,
you're 100% right, and that's really important. I think as officials, we have to be cognizant how our actions on the ice are perceived by others. How is everybody else looking at us? Because to a certain extent, we're playing a role. We're playing the role of the independent arbiter with the job of enforcing the rules of the game and maintaining safety and fairness in the game. And how does that look? And you're right, you know, Paul, and especially not even at the youth level, but at all levels, you might have a relationship with one coach. It might be a close friend. You might have grown up with them or something, and you could be over there yucking it up, like you said. You've got to pay attention to the other guy because you set yourself up on the wrong foot right after that. So, you know, as we move along here, you know, who are officials communicating with, right? For the most part, and we're not talking tonight about communication between officials. We're going to have another ZoomCast on that in the future about how can you effectively work with partners, with your fellow officials on the ice. Really, when we're communicating with players, coaches, and team personnel, as well as off-ice officials. Once again, we're going to talk about off-ice officials in the future, but you know, essentially, we're focused on the players and the coaches. Is who are we communicating with, right? With players, who are we talking to? And a lot of times, this is really going to be level specific. At the lower levels, you may not rely as much on the team leaders, the players with the C's and the A's. At the higher levels, you may focus on the players with C's and the A's more. But Paul, I guess I'll ask you right off the bat, at the lower levels, do you expect, like with your team at the Bantam level, are you going to expect the player that you've chosen or your players have chosen to be a captain or an alternate, is that going to be the one you want talking to the officials most of the time?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time. I mean, unless it's something that's complicated, if it's a simplistic question, I think it can be answered, you know, for the captain or alternate captain, and they can relay that information that's basic back to the coach. If it's something that's complicated or you know, a situation that they may not fully understand, then yeah, you'd have to go to the coach. And I think it's a case-by-case basis, obviously. But for the most part, you know, at the 14U level, these kids should start have a little bit more responsibility. And so being able to send them first, I think is the right kind of mindset for showing the leadership qualities that you want to start instilling in these players as well.
And you're right about that. And Greg, I know we've had some conversations with some coaches at the professional or junior level, and they really feel it's important that the officials respect and work through the captains and alternates, because that's the person that the coaching staff feels are the leaders. And I guess for you, are those the players you really want talking with the referees most of the time, or the officials most of the time?
Yeah, 100%. And more times than not, those captains on your team are going to have a better sense of how to communicate and be respectful towards the refs as well. Sometimes other players in the team can get heated and spout off at the mouth. And it's very important for coaches to communicate with their players the expectation that that communication comes through the captains. And also, if you feel that those players need a little tutelage on how they should be communicating with the refs and build that rapport. I mean, any edge you can get to get the refs on your side and make sure that there's a fairness within how the game's going. You don't want to, have the refs kind of look at your bench as the opponent. You want them to be on your team.
And I think that's really important, right? You're, we're playing the game, we're keeping score. The idea is to have a winner at the end of the game. And as a coach, you want your team to win. And you want to take every advantage you can. And part of that is running a bench that ideally is kind of low maintenance for the official in that regard. Yep. And I think, Keith, there are going to be times, though, as a referee, that maybe that guy that's your captain or the alternate is a little more of a challenge. Is it okay to find a buddy out there or somebody that you can talk to? Maybe it's a goalie or somebody else, even if he doesn't have a letter, or are you, as a referee, are you okay with finding that guy to deliver a message once in a while?
Oh, absolutely. I think whoever you feel comfortable with gaining that rapport. I mean, for myself, I can remember as a younger official, it certainly was easier to talk to a player versus going to a bench where you're dealing with an adult and maybe an angry adult as coach. So gaining that rapport with the captain or assistant captain or the goaltender, it's huge. That it's very important. And quite frankly, it's a little bit more comfortable, honestly. And once you become a little bit more skilled with that, maybe you feel a little bit more comfortable talking to a coach, or like Paul or Greg said, maybe if it's a complicated situation, you might want to go to the benches directly and just say to the captain, say, no disrespect, but if you try to explain everything to, a 14 or 15-year-old, by the time they try to take that message back to the bench, the coaches may be even more confused. So sometimes it's okay to cut those guys out of the middle and go right to the bench and have that conversation with the coaches. But certainly there's nothing wrong with trying to work with a captain or assistant captain, and not even so much trying to buddy up, but maybe they can have a calming influence on some of their teammates. Or if you said, hey, you know what, number 27, he's a great player, but you know what, he's constantly hitting high, can you talk to him? It's another outlet or another way that you can essentially, and I think if you bring all this together, what we've been talking about, it's having that partnership between us and the players and the coaches versus knocking that wall down. We don't need to have an adversarial relationship and have that open dialogue. I think it's critical to having a game, because there's so many things that come up that, unfortunately, we have potholes during the game that, we fall into certain things. Maybe things don't go one team's way or the other team's way. If we can kind of alleviate some of that stuff, it's certainly going to make the game a little bit smoother, or as smooth as possible.
No, for sure. And I think the one thing we do have to acknowledge, right? So we've got a 14U coach and a professional coach and stuff like that. If you're working at the lower levels at a house league game, squirts or peewees or something like that, our job as an official also is an educator. We can never be afraid as an official to talk to that young player, whoever it is, if he's got a legitimate question. Because and ultimately, you never want to turn your back on anybody that's going to be respectful. You may say to that player, listen, I can't talk to you now. We need to get the game going. But if a young player doesn't understand why they were offside, or doesn't understand the icing rule, or, we're ultimately, as an official, we're trying to serve the game. We're trying to make the game better. Answering that question quickly in a polite manner is going to go a long way. So I think we've got to always remember that as well. So for players, that's what we're talking about. For coaches, there's really a where, when, and how factor. And when we talk about coaches, team personnel, right? Where are we talking to coaches during the game? During the game, obviously, we're talking to them on the bench. And, we're also, I'm going to fast forward here in a second. We want to acknowledge that we're in some unique situations with COVID at the moment, and USA Hockey put out some guidelines for communication and a lot of other stuff for officials, and we're going to get to that, but we're gonna talk in generality right now. But when we're talking to a coach during the game, it's going to be at the bench. It's not with a coach standing in the door, right? Or I don't know. I know Greg well enough to know it's very rare that he's up on the bench yelling and screaming and waving his arms, and we're going to assume Paul is the same way. But, Keith, if the coach is up there really yelling and screaming, what's really our first move when we're talking to a coach during the game?
You want to bring him down off that bench, right? You want to bring him down. You want to be able to talk with him at eye level, versus if he's up on that dashboard looking down at you and spewing at you. It doesn't look good. We talked about how it looks perception-wise to parents and players. Having that partnership, just pulling the coach down, whether it's Greg or Paul, and just say, hey, come down, let's talk about this, and being able to sort it out in basically a less threatening manner versus, when the coach is up, waving his arms, he's standing on top of that dasher. They're making almost a scene.
Right. And I guess, Paul, when you're really heated, is a referee going to be able to kind of calm you down and get you back so you can have a conversation? How do you like that to happen?
I think just being approachable, right? Having the ability to come over and to try to say, hey, coach, calm down. I'll talk to you. Just give me a minute here, and just let the coach, calm down. I think the biggest thing you have to watch out for is coach's demeanor too. We talked about before about, verbal and nonverbal communication. If a coach is, as you guys talked about, a coach up on a bench or he's pointing at you, that you got to get him away from that level of intensity down to your level and just say, hey, coach, we can talk, but just you remain calm, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation with you. And that way it kind of maybe resets them. Nothing's worse than, not being communicated to, kind of given the stop sign, as some would call it. They're putting their hand out and like, I'm not talking to you. Well, at some point in time, you're going to run a situation where you need to speak to the coaches. And again, you want to break down that barrier where they feel like there's confrontation. So you have to be able to approach them. And at the same time, it's a two-way street. So if they're not showing you respect, they need to respect you. If you're not showing them respect, you have to respect them. So I think just learning how to massage that moment to get them to everyone to calm down and just have a open line of communication, I think is important.
No, for sure. And I think, Greg, you mentioned it earlier about officials that turn their back or they're hiding from you or they're acknowledging you. That's going to get them in trouble, right? I mean, there are times where you legitimately have a question and might need to speak to them, correct?
Yeah, there's nothing more frustrating than a ref that doesn't have the courage to come over to a bench to talk to a coach. And obviously, if the game has gotten to a point where the coach is that heated, out of respect, to not be fearful to go over and have, as these guys were saying, a direct conversation, bring the coach's energy down to your level. Just by going over there, you've shown a sign of respect, of willing to listen to the coach. Whether you come to an agreement or not, there's plenty of times where I don't agree with the ref and the ref doesn't agree with me, and we discuss the finer point really quick. But the fact that he at least came over and attempted to communicate, more times than not, diffused me. The couple times where they wouldn't come over, it does nothing but set a fire and gets me really worked up, that the lack of respect of just not willing to communicate. And it's not that, and there's even been times where the ref would say that they messed up, they made a mistake. That might be the best thing I've ever heard. And we're all humans. I make mistakes on the bench as I'm coaching. The refs are making mistakes in the game, and we all get that. There's a human element to it. To even admit that they made a mistake rather than, you know, we're not going to say they're going to make up for it later in the game, but just to admit that they made a mistake. I can deal with that. I appreciate you coming over and talking. Awesome. Thank you.
I mean, you know, Paul, what are you going to say if a referee comes over and says, you know what, coach, you're right. I made a mistake. That's on me. I'm going to be better next time. You don't have a whole lot you can come back with, is there?
Not usually, no. You're just appreciating the fact that they're being accountable to themselves, because ultimately that's what this is about, is the game has to be an accountable game. And so if everyone seems to be, they're on the same level as far as they hold each other accountable, I think that's the most important part, because we're trying to keep this game, as you talk about, is fair and safe, right? And so if everyone has accountability, I think that's when you get the best product in the long term.
No, for sure. And you know, I'm scrolling through the chats here, and one of the things that just got brought up, and I think this is a really good point, you know, maybe lower your voice when you come to the bench.
Yeah.
If I come to the bench and I'm screaming and I'm at octave 10 and I'm yelling, that's not going to calm you down, is it? But if I come over and I'm, hey, coach, I'll talk to you, right? I'll talk to you, but you can't yell and scream. You got to get off the bench and let's just have a conversation. That hopefully is going to lower the temperature. I mean, we like to tell the officials, right? We don't need another arsonist. We need a fireman. And if you come over and you're yelling and screaming, all you're doing is creating a bigger problem. And we're going to see we're going to see a video example here in a little bit that might be maybe a good example of that. How about off the ice, right? So a couple of different situations. Off the ice in a youth game where it's the end of the game, Keith, and the coach is walking off the ice and he asks for an explanation on something, and you're in the same tunnel or whatnot. What's our response going to be?
I think first and foremost, if the coach is respectful, I don't mind having a quick chat there. If it's something that maybe is a little bit more controversial or something like that, I would rather just say, coach, you know what, let's try to talk about this after, you know, maybe we retreat to the locker room. I think it's very dependent, again, on their tone and our tone. I mean, we can elevate things, and if we ignore or just say we're not talking right now, and youth hockey maybe is a little bit different than professional hockey, where we're in a common area with pro teams, where youth hockey, you may only do, you know, an area where there's parents, and the parents obviously are going to chime in with how they feel, you know, about how the game went and stuff like that. So I really think it's important, the surroundings. I believe it's important, if you are going to have a dialogue, to have it in a respectful manner, in a place where you can both talk and you're not surrounded by parents and players and stuff like that. But certainly I think that's the most important thing. But as long as the coaches or the coaching staff's respectful and you can have that dialogue, I'm all for that. Again, it's got to be the right situation. It's got to be the right place and the right time. And, you know, you can make it challenging than junior hockey or professional hockey. You have to, if the setting's right, I would certainly have that conversation.
No, for sure. And I think we have to remember that. And then I think at the higher levels too, if a coach wants to talk to you in between periods, the best answer to the coach is, you know what, coach, let's talk before the next period back on the bench. Because that may, and I see you nodding your head, Paul, that may give the coach an opportunity to calm down.
Absolutely.
And now that conversation is more in a controlled environment, and everybody's a little bit calmer, right?
Yeah, agreed. You know, that's the thing, is that some coaches not some, we all get caught up in the moment, right? And so if it's something that can be, you know, waited on to the next period, you know, it's probably better off for everyone to be able to just calm the demeanor, especially when you're dealing off the ice, where it could be turn into a heated conversation potentially in front of spectators. And that's usually not a no-win situation for anyone. So I would recommend that for all young officials to say, hey, can we talk about this at the beginning of next period, if you feel there's any sort of potential heightened elevation of communication. No,
for sure. And so I think, you know, when are we talking to coaches, right? When they ask a question, sometimes we're going to talk to them. If the question is legitimate, and certainly let's acknowledge right? And Greg, I'm sure if you have multiple penalties and you've got 4 players in the box and a whole bunch of different things going on, you want to talk to the referee so you can understand what they're talking about, right? But are you going to call the referee over after every tripping penalty? Probably not, and we don't want that referee going over after every tripping penalty, right, Greg?
Yeah, for sure. The simple calls and the simple penalties are easy, and we understand. Even if we disagree with it, there's no need to come explain yourself. I think for the most part, there's a gray area sometimes with penalties, and it's just part of the game. But if there's a ton of penalties or there was a bit of a scrum going on, and it's hard to see within the items when you're from the bench and you're further away and the refs are closer to see it, it's nice to have the explanation, and important to give the explanation to both benches, like we talked about earlier, and the communication level and respect for both benches.
Right. And so, tricky or unusual situations, most of the time we're going to go to the bench. When a message needs to be sent, and actually sent isn't really the word I should be using. It should be when a message needs to be delivered, you're always going to go over. And in a lot of times, this is what we like to talk about, putting the ball in the other court. And this really has to do, honestly, and it kind of feeds into our zero tolerance and abuse policy that we talked about last week. But, if you need to put a coach on notice, or if you need help, right? Coach, can you help me? Paul, can you help me? Number 14's been in my ear all night. If I keep hearing him, I'm going to have to give him a penalty. Greg, listen, your assistant coach, he can't be yelling at me. Can you please put a stop to it? I don't want to have to give you a penalty, but if it continues, you're going to be shorthanded, right? We're trying to put the ball in your court, and we're delivering the message. But most importantly, and I see this, I saw somebody mention if an official or if a coach doesn't treat me with respect, I'm not going to give them respect back. And you know what? Ultimately, we'll always have to be respectful. And a motto we like to use is treat disrespect with respect. Because the minute you go in the gutter, if you go up and you're swearing and you need to tell that effing guy that he's going to shut his effing mouth or I'm going to run him, you know what? The coach is going to look at you and say, you don't have control. You don't have control of yourself. Why should I control my team? So that's when we're going to want to deliver that message. And usually, Greg, that message, you're going to appreciate getting the opportunity to address something, right?
Yeah, that's a really important point you just made, is the ref keeping his cool and having the confidence, regardless of how inappropriate the coach is being at the time. I've seen it happen a ton where coaches just go beyond where they should, say things they shouldn't be saying, and are being very disrespectful. The most professional thing that's absolutely 100% of the time needed is for the ref to stay cool, stay calm, stay assertive, and just trust in what they're doing and not lash back at the coach, because that just completely shows a lack of control, like you said. And to the point where the ref comes and delivers a message to the coach, I've seen times where a ref will come over to the bench and deliver a message directly to the athlete. And I don't think that's the way to do it at all. You can come in front of the bench and deliver the message to the coach about that athlete. The entire bench hears it, that individual player hears it. But I think the communication has to be between the ref and the coach, and then the coach can reiterate that message to his bench and to that player, and eliminate that direct conversation between the ref and the player.
Right. Keith, we never want to embarrass a player in front of his teammates, do we, Keith?
No, and certainly, like Greg just said, when you have that form in front of the bench, if I'm talking to Greg, obviously a vast majority of those players are going to hear me. There's no point to single out a player there and embarrass him, because if anything, his emotions are gonna raise there, and it's not good. I think, you know what, you go to Greg, you say, hey, this is going on, or whatever it is. I think in most cases, he's more than happy to try to handle it, because he doesn't want to see that particular player or players be penalized. And that's a way you're gaining some rapport and some respect with him, which in the long run can lead to maybe hopefully a smoother game.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay, so we just talked about it, both verbally and non-verbally. That's how you're going to communicate with coaches. And then always with respect. We're never getting into the gutter. We can, at all levels. And unfortunately, we hear this at the youth level as well about officials swearing at players and coaches. It's non-defensible. And, we're going to talk right now about, in a moment, about the zero tolerance and respect policy and abuse policy. And the one thing that we will say, and USA Hockey has your back, and the board of directors just passed an updated policy where you do not need to be abused as an official. But with that said, there is an expectation that you conduct yourself in a professional manner. And the minute you lack that professionalism, and you start swearing at players, or you start yelling, or you start getting personal, all the things that would get a coach or a player a penalty from you, you lose that respect and you lose all credibility, right? And so that's really important. And then, this, when we talk about the mental mindset, and this goes back right to the question earlier about feeling like coaches held grudges and do officials hold grudges. We need to go into this with a clean slate every night, right? I'm sure, Paul, you see at the tier 1 level, you probably see a pretty consistent group of officials working your games. And some nights aren't going to be as good as other nights. And, I know one expectation I'm going to guess that you hope when you get behind the benches, I hope if a player got upset at one of the officials and he earned a misconduct in the previous game, you're going to hope that official is starting with a clean slate, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's what you hope for, and that's what you're looking at. And, as a coach, you want to have every game starting off fair. And if you feel like that's not being the case, then there's an injustice to the game. And ultimately, that's what this is for. It's about the game and the kids. And at the higher levels, it's about an equal opportunity for the business side of it too, right? Where guys, it matters when people win and lose. And so obviously, the integrity of the game is most important. And so when you come in with the clear mindset, it just starts everything off the right path.
Oh, for sure. And Greg, I guess, for you, especially, and I referenced this earlier, when you were an assistant coach at the NTDP, Seth Abbott really hammered on that as well. And, both as a player and as a coach, do you ever worry sometimes that the official is going to hold a grudge against you if maybe you got wound up the previous game? And what do you do to address that?
That's a good question. Coaches for sure are guilty for holding a grudge against the ref, and you come into the beginning of the game, you see the ref skate out, or you saw it on the sheet prior, and you're just kind of hang your head and like, oh, him again. I think it's human nature for everybody or it's really difficult to have a clean slate mentally. I do think we need to work towards that and be better on it on both sides. My strategy personally, anyway, I can't speak for when I was an assistant at the NTDP because you're not really communicating as much with the refs. But as a head coach, if there had been a few games where I thought things were going against us, or I felt a ref was being a bit disrespectful, I always looked in the most appropriate channels to have a conversation with them off ice or at a later date, maybe through yourself in the USHL, Scott, to try and build that relationship and make it better. I know at the end of the day, the best way for our team to have success and for the players to have the best product on the ice is for us to have the best relationships with the refs. So if it doesn't get off to a good start, I'm going to find any strategy possible to make sure that we build and mend those relationships.
Oh, perfect. Real quick, I want to talk about USA Hockey's abuse and zero tolerance policy. And like I said last week, and like I'm saying now, you are not meant to be a target for abuse. And as officials, and I want to be clear about this, as officials, you have tools in your toolbox to deal with abuse. However, with that said, one of the things in the policy that we're recommending, and you officials are going to hear about this in your in your seminars this year is we really want you to introduce yourself to the coaches before the game. That's really important. Build that rapport. Make sure you go talk to them, right? And Keith, that's going to help, especially at the youth level, when coaches may not have known you or met you, right? If you go and you have a quick conversation, that's going to help, right?
No, absolutely. I mean, show that you're there and that you're ready to work and that you're personable, and it just starts with something as simple as that. And I think that's going to help you throughout the game. If you start on the right foot, it's the officials that get into trouble that, sometimes, believe it or not, and we all know all the officials are watching this. Maybe you're having a tough day. Maybe you had a rough day at work, and maybe the rink's the last place you want to be. And it shows in your face. It shows in your demeanor, and really it doesn't set you up for success. So something as simple as introducing yourself and showing a willingness that you're there to listen and that you're there to work hard, within your skating and how you act. And again, your body, your language, and just how you handle yourself. That's just the right way to really start the game on the right foot. Just be human, be honest, and be open, and start things on the right foot. And that's certainly going to help you in the right direction to start that game.
Right. And Paul, when we talk about parents, and we know parents can be a challenge at times at the youth level, one of the things as part of this policy is we want the officials working through the coach and to control parents when parents get up and maybe a little too carried away and become abusive. I would assume as a coach at that level, that's something you would embrace and want to help deal with, because those aren't problems you want or need, correct?
Correct. I mean, that's something that I don't think enough organizations take a stance on and help support, ask their coaches to support them and to have the parents be kept at bay. And that's something that my expectation for the parents that I have on the kids I have on my teams is for them to have good behavior. And I'm not afraid of letting them know that, even in a game, if it gets to the point where it has happened in the past, where I've had to yell across the rink at a parent saying, enough, this is about the kids. And if you lose sight of that, you're doing injustice to the game and to them. And so that to me is understanding that if the coach can support, the officials in that, you're going to obviously gain a lot of, headway on that. I'm sure that you guys as officials would appreciate that as well. I mean, that's no different than the way I want to control my bench, is I want to make sure the officials know I have control of it. And if there's a problem, that they can come to me and talk to me about it. And I know at the higher levels with you, Greg, I'm sure it's the same thing, where speaking with a referee, if you got a player who's kind of been out of control a little bit, they come to you, they want to be able to trust that you're going to be able to handle and take care of it right then and there.
Yeah, absolutely. And if a player has an issue, or I can see that they're yelling or screaming at the ref, I'm trying to listen to what that dialogue is. If the ref comes over, I'm trying to ask him his perception of what's going on with this scenario. Try and take the communication over from the player, allow them to relax, cool down, diffuse the situation, communicate with the ref. And something else that was top of mind for me going into this was, I don't do it a lot, but there's definitely a time and place for it. And again, at the youth level, I don't know how much coaches are aware of having these strategies, but there are times, there might be a really clean open ice hit that just completely leveled one of our players. And even though I think it's a clean hit, I'm probably still going to yell at the ref in a respectful manner, but I'm going to bring some energy to the situation just so that my players know that I have their back. So sometimes as a referee, you might be getting yelled at, but it may not have any intent or anything to do with how you're doing your job or who you are as a person. It's literally a strategy for the coach to bring energy to their bench, to know that that I have their back, to kind of read through those lines of communication as well, and not look into sometimes when the coach is yelling.
That's absolutely true. And I see Keith nodding his head. I mean, that's something at the higher levels, that is something good officials need to be able to recognize as well. When is it actual abuse versus when is it a coach, whatever. And maybe that coach has lost 5 games in a row at home and he's feeling some heat and things like that. At the youth level, the one thing I will say at the youth level, we need to be careful as a youth official when you're working youth hockey games. You can't let coaches and players get carried away.
Yep.
And you have to, and once again, coach, you know, you might be trying to fire up your team, but you're going to have to do it a little less loudly, or don't make quite a scene here. Force me in a position to have where I have to penalize you, and I don't want to do that. And the coach is going to hear the message. A couple more things, and then we'll get to some Q&As. But real quick, you know, we acknowledge, you know, that we're dealing with COVID-19 right now, and hockey is back, and they're even playing games in certain parts of the country. You know, we talk about lowering your voice and having a quiet conversation with the coach at the bench. The reality is that may not be possible right now. You may have to communicate at a further distance, and that's where it's really important for us as officials to know we need to be respectful. The other thing, when we're talking to players, you know, a lot of times you might have those conversations away from the referee's crease, and that's okay if you're comfortable with it, but you're going to have to ask the player to step back a little bit. And you know, we can really use the referee's crease to our advantage. That's built-in social distancing. And that's, you know, that's something we can use to our advantage. And the one thing that I think is important now, coaches aren't going to get to yell and scream at me when I'm standing very close to the bench. I'm going to skate away, because quite frankly, that might be kind of dangerous. And I think at the youth levels and even at the higher levels, we have to acknowledge that. And we don't know whether coaches are going to be wearing face coverings on the bench or not. But a lot of our communication for the next little while is going to be at a greater distance. And so we have to make sure cognizant of our how we conduct ourselves and of our choice of words. And the other thing finally is we have to be able to reflect back afterwards and learn from each and every game on how we can do things better. And with that, I'm going to show you a video real quick here and ask our panelists to comment, and then we'll take a couple of questions before we wrap up. I'm going to show a video, and let's see what we like and what we don't like about this. We're going to fast forward it a little bit here. Okay, so I'm hopeful that came through for everybody. Thoughts, Greg? Your former club. That's a few years before you got there. What comes to mind when you see that? What do you like and what don't you like about that?
I love that you came to me first. I like that the refs went to the bench and had a conversation, regardless of how heated the coach was. He showed confidence. He wasn't afraid of the situation. He made an attempt to communicate. Personally, I wouldn't, as a coach, have been that aggressive in how I communicated. If the ref showed the respect to come over to the bench to speak, more times than not, I would speak with a low tone and just have a respectful conversation, regardless of whether or not we agree on the situation. But because I also believe in the culture of my team, if I act like that, my players are going to act like that, and they're not going to be disciplined on the ice, and they're going to take more penalties, and they're going to be chirping and saying inappropriate things to other players in the ice. And that's just not the way. I mean, team sports are for the purpose, I believe, to help grow people as human beings and learn how to do things the right way. And if I'm acting like that on the bench, and my players are going to mirror that, and I don't want that at all.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Paul, what's your takeaway?
I mean, As a coach, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be the same way on that animate unless it's something really egregious that, I completely disagree with. But in most cases, I'm going to be like Greg and want to control my demeanor because ultimately my players are reflective of who I am. And so I don't like the fact of the way that, he fired the whistle back at me and yelled at me and starts yelling to go in the box. Like, you can just as calmly just say, okay, now you've got your two, because you gave him the warning. Like the referee set him up for a warning. He let him hang himself, and he did. But then he fired back, and I would be surprised if that coach decided to just start going off after that point, and just because he re-elevated the situation versus trying to diffuse it. So that's my take. I wouldn't personally, as a coach, I don't think I'd get to that point. At the youth level, I'm very careful about my words and swearing. Obviously, junior level and pro level, it's a different animal. But for me, I'm on the same page as Greg, as I want to try to diffuse the situation in a sense where I want my players to be reflective of how I act.
Oh, for sure. And okay, and so now Keith, you're the officiating manager here. What are you going to tell the official after the game on that?
I thought we started out the conversation well. I don't like how we finished the conversation. Obviously, the coach is elevated, and whatever we're saying there really isn't computing in his head. So you know what? Sometimes it's okay just to quit the conversation and skate away. There doesn't need to be a winner and a loser in every conversation, every little exchange. And sometimes it's okay just to skate away and get the game going. And you know what? We don't need to hang on every last word that he says this or that. Sometimes, I'm not telling our officials out here that are watching this to ignore abuse, but sometimes there's going to be heightened emotion, and it's okay just to skate away and instead being there and then blowing that whistle, like Paul said. I think we cause more harm than good there. And unfortunately, if we're trying to build a rapport of the season and I'm going to see that team again, I'm sure he's going to remember that as hey, it's this guy again. And you know what? He likes to stir it up. Like, to me, I really thought that could have been handled a lot better. Started out well, certainly didn't finish well.
Yeah. No, he did a great job of saying, listen, you have to calm down. And you could see the coach's energy kind of stop for a second. And the referee started talking again. We were off the races. And you know what? You're right. It's okay to say, Coach, if you're going to keep yelling, I'm going to skate away. We're not going to have this conversation. And then if you skate away and now he's yelling and screaming, then boom, you bang him and you give him that minor penalty. And he's earned it and he's been put on notice. Standing in there and hammering the whistle in his face. And that's a situation like if I'm reflecting back, if that's me, I can watch that, I'm going to say I was way too hyped up. The referee in that conversation. I need to be the calm, cool, and collected guy bringing the temperature down. Let's go to a couple of questions. We've had a few really good ones here. And I'll just open it up and whoever wants to jump in. One really good question was, what tips do you have for young officials communicating or talking with older coaches?
I think a lot of it starts pre-game, right? Hopefully, a lot of the young officials, hopefully you're paired with maybe a more experienced official. Maybe lean on them for some advice. Talk to them in your pregame and just say, hey, if you're that mentor ref, hey, are you comfortable with this? What about that? What do you know about these teams? What do you know about this coach? If there is a situation on the ice, maybe I lean on that particular older official that he's the one that's doing more of the communicating, and I'm using I'm just listening and I'm trying to soak in what he's saying and how he handles things. I think that can be a very valuable information source that's going to make you a better official. It's just learning and being a sponge and trying to figure out, what works and what doesn't. Everyone has different personalities. Everyone handles things differently, but certainly you can learn from those other officials and kind of lean on that mentor official there to try to get you through a difficult situation there.
And Paul, so if you've got a game and you've got my son's 15 years old, so he's still a little bit young, but let's say next year it's my son out there as a 16-year-old, an adult coach. Are you going to consciously try to only talk to the adult referee, or do you play that dynamic? What goes through your mind, or do you want to just talk to the official that made the call, regardless of age?
Ideally, you want to talk to the official that made the call because you want to know what their perspective is versus what you see as a coach. I mean, ultimately, that's what it comes down to is what the perspective is. And at times, it's going to be simply, as we talk about the communication, it's going to be we're going to agree to disagree, coach, as an official. There's just going to be times where your perspective and their perspective are just different realms because of vantage point. And that could be just part of it. And so for me as a coach, I'm going to hopefully speak with the referee that made the call, because otherwise what will happen, see the tendency to happen is they'll pass the buck. Well, I didn't make the call, so you're going to have to talk to him, and so ultimately you want to try to work with the guy who did make the call. And ultimately as an official, hopefully you're not trying to hide from anything. As we brought that up earlier in the conversation, there has to be an accountability factor, and mistakes do happen, but when they are made, it's okay to own up to it as well, as like Greg brought up earlier. So for me, I would like to speak with the official that made the call. And from there, just go with a dialogue, that makes sense.
No, that's great. And I think, listen, I mean, I see this now with my son. It's really hard as a young official. If you're out there and watching this right now and you're a young official and you've just started off and you've got a parent behind the bench, hard to go up and talk to that parent or that coach. And it's even more difficult to say to that coach, you need to stop yelling at me. You cannot do it. That might be the toughest thing a young official has to do. And you certainly hope that you've got an adult partner with you, but if you don't, and you're out there with your, if it's two of you and you're both teenagers and the coach is yelling and screaming, once again, you don't need to be abused. And it's okay to tell them that. Another good thing, and I see this coming through, showing empathy, showing a little bit of empathy. Hey, Greg, I know you've been down. I know I've put you down 4 times in a row this period, and all you've been doing is on the penalty kill. I don't like doing it either. Your players can't continue to latch on with their sticks. Or whatever it is. Here's another quick question, and then we'll wrap it up. And I'll throw this one at Greg, and then I'll throw it to Keith. What do you suggest for an official if he's got a player or coach that he just can't get along with? It's all oil and water, and we're going to have those situations. We're not, everything's not rainbows and sunshine. So what do you suggest to that official when he's got a player that might be your captain that he just can't get along?
I think it's important, if it's a player, that the ref continues to communicate with the head coach on what that dynamic is. Just explain to the head coach, I'm no longer talking to your captain based on the way he's communicating with me. Try and diffuse that situation by working through the coach. If it's a coach that they're having a hard time communicating or working with, I still think there needs to be a respect level and a leadership level in terms of being the person on the ice that will always go to the bench, continue to have your routine, continue to attempt to communicate. If that coach wants to continue to yell at you, even when you come over to have a sidebar conversation, at least you made the attempt. And then, like Keith and yourself has talked about, you can skate away from that point if you're being disrespected or abused. But I do think the process and the discipline still has to be in place to try and communicate with the coach and still stick with your process. And if they're not in agreement or not willing to change the way they're working through their process, then again, you just skate away and don't take the abuse.
That's perfect. What do you think, Keith?
No, I agree with Greg and Paul both talking about we have to have a clean slate there. And yes, there are many different difficult personalities that you're going to deal with over the course of a game, over the course of a season. It's finding those links that on that team, whether it's an assistant captain, maybe it's another player, maybe it's a goaltender. You got to continue to try to be effective and not basically put up walls that you're not going to talk or hold it against a team when maybe there's a trouble player or someone like that. I know obviously it's easier said than done. And there's days when, it's been a long day, it's been a long trip, and there's a couple players that we really don't want to deal with, but it's so important that we still have those other lines of communication, whether it's the coach or an assistant captain, whoever it may be, to try through those situations. You might be successful, maybe you won't, but at the end of the day, you at least have to go through those different avenues to try to make a difference, because otherwise, if you're shutting down everyone, you're ultimately going to hurt yourself and you're going to hurt the game. And that's something we don't want to do. It's, at the end of the day, this is a partnership, and we have to work through it. And some days, you know what, we as officials need to be better. And most days, sometimes the coaches and the teams need to be better. And I know for a lot of you officials out there that work at the youth level, that is challenging. Parents on the bench are very challenging. And, you know, it's important to try to go out and, like we said, from the beginning of the game, giving a good, honest effort, showing that you're engaged in the game. And, you know, sometimes that's going to be good for the game and they're going to respect that. Sometimes they're not. But we as USA Hockey have your back to support you with the rules that are in place, with the zero tolerance policy and working through those challenges, to know that, you know, you are supported as an official, and we do not advocate you as officials, you know, taking any of that abuse, because we need you as officials to grow the game, and it truly is a partnership.
You know what? I think that's a great message and a really, really, really important one. And quite frankly, there's a couple of other questions, but I see you and I will get back to you offline. But based on that message from Keith, I think we're, you know, honestly, I think that's the best way we can end it here. So, you know, I most importantly, I want to once again thank our panelists for the time that they've dedicated tonight. It's been a great discussion, and to Keith, Greg, and Paul, really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Thanks,
Yep,
Scott.
thank you.
No, absolutely. Our upcoming schedule, and you can find all of these as well as the past episodes on usahockey.com on the officiating page. But next Tuesday, we're going to have a presentation on mentor programs. Following up with that, we're going to have coaching and supervision, how officials can work with officiating coaches and supervisors. On July 7th, we're going to have an officiating program update. Matt Leaf, Dave Labuda, and Ken Reinhardt will be giving you an update on our just completed annual Congress and what you can expect heading into the season in terms of seminars and things like that. And then July 14th, we're going to have a ZoomCast dedicated to our women's officiating program. And after that, we've got another myriad of topics. So thank you again. We wish you all good health and well-being, and we'll see you next week.